You're listening to a Very Spatial podcast, episode 730, January 28th, 2024.
Hello and welcome to a Very Spatial podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week we're going to be talking about some stuff, but of course there's always some newses after we say Happy New Year, because I think our last episode was on New Year's Eve. Is that right?
About right, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, because we had some convergences of stuff, and we had to roll to today as our...
We had a grant that we had to write.
Yes, that's
we wrote a grant. It was a very big grant.
Ever-loving but Jesus out of all of us, I think.
It was an effort. And there would, if we would have done the podcast, it would have been like, bleh, 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 bleh. And that would have been like the high point. It just, there was no gas in that tank.
There was a temptation to do a podcast about the topic that's kind of central to the grant that would have led to many expletives of "no, you're wrong" type of conversation.
Yes, it seems triggering.
Day. Yes, so that's why I kind of stepped away from that idea and just like, no, we'll just wait.
It's not a terrible idea. It's just that
in that time it would have been a terrible idea.
Yeah, I think
you need distance, and then we can discuss it.
That's right. Perspective comes from scale, right? Step back.
But our first news item. Do one of you guys want to talk about this one? Because of course you've talked more to the folks at NGS to talk, not that NGS, but the other NGS, about the update.
Right. So first up the news, the National Geodetic Survey wants to remind us that there is a new datum that's been coming for like 5 years now. They've been saying it's coming, and it's actually coming. So
probably in 2025.
Yeah. So, and we're all going to really need to get on board with moving in that direction. It's a major improvement. It's an all upside. I think that people need to embrace it and learn about it. And the nice thing about this particular new datum is that it's kind of self-correcting. So there's an excellent chance we won't have to change, ideally ever. I've been in the industry long enough to know that there's always going to be some hiccups down the line that we have to go, we have to tweak for that. But it's a pretty exciting thing. And I just think it's something that certainly in West Virginia in the geospatial industry, the general attitude has been, I don't want to think about that right now or later or way later. And it's being put off. So, don't. But check out the link in the show notes to find out more about the details and nuances there. I'm not going to pretend I know all the details or nuances.
If you are interested in the details, there are a lot of videos that the National Geodetic Survey has put out on YouTube that explain the coming changes, including some definition changes, some terminology that will make things more clear to everyone, be more interoperable, such as more of the term framework being used. I would check that out. And also, time is running out to submit for the GNSS or leveling data for the initial modernization effort.
Comments and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you participate in that and give them data, which they help to use to calculate, you have till Leap Day, February 29th.
February 29th. That
Yes.
is a real day. It is happening this year.
And I think they picked that on purpose.
Yeah. They're rolling out a new software as well called Laser that will be involved in some of this calculation. So all kinds of things going on with this update.
I have to give congratulations to Sue for not pronouncing it the way that I would have, which is laser.
And even though you congratulated her, you then had to.
Then you did it.
I
right?
did have to do it.
Now it's recorded. Yes, then you did it.
Here's a little cheat code for those in the United States on leap year. It's always the same year as the presidential election. So that's how you know.
Maybe that's how they know when to do the election.
I'm not going to say. It also, up until, I don't know when it is, they split the Olympics into winter and summer, but it also was an Olympic year every year. So I think it's the Summer Olympics.
Yes, the Summer Olympics now.
Yeah, so like all the Olympics were that year up until they split it. So
I mean, it's nice. We're going to go from a horizontal and vertical datum to a datum, so we don't have to worry about which one we're using, whether we're using, for some reason, NAD 27 for our horizontal and NAVD 88 for our, and even our numbers will be the same. It'll both be 2022, even though it won't start being used until 25. Right now, of course, we have NAD 83 and NAVD 88. So whenever you're teaching these things, people can be like, why? And your answers in the near future will be like, there is no why. It's just this.
Well, there's still a why, but it's just this.
Yes. You only have to worry about one model.
Like I said, the thing that I find most exciting about this is the self-correcting nature. So this could last, because, NAD 27 and the next one was 83, right? So you're talking about almost 60 years lag between updating that. And then now we're 2022. So I can't do the math, 50 years or whatever, 40 years. There we go. So, there's going to be an excellent chance most of the people listening to this career will be over before they even really think about this ever again.
Also important is the fact that there's new technologies that continue to come out. And we've talked about game engines a lot, but recently, a company out of Korea, Techtree Innovation, has released essentially a 3D geospatial map platform, as it's called in the press release, called Around. Those are all caps, AROUND. And it's kind of broken into 4 different products. But kind of the key here, I think, is one, of course, they're bringing in a lot of 3D data to use within this new geospatial platform. But also, it's built in Unreal Engine. So that's kind of a nice thing to see after talking about how much, these things, Unity, Unreal, 3D engines in general, are going to have an impact on the geospatial. Actually seeing companies building in these environments. It's not like they're the only ones who are doing this. We've talked to others that are rolling out various bits and pieces and whole products in these engines, but it's just, it's nice to keep seeing this kind of rolling out.
And it is these things look great, right? And there are different approaches to this, but this one is build the platform specifically in places. But it's trying to do the tough thing, which is capture the detail we can see from satellite imagery and things like that in the 3D without having to hand do everything, right? Because it's just massive and it's too hard to do. This is the trailer they've got up for it is pretty impressive. And Unreal is one of those platforms that you can choose to build on. And so others we've talked to have taken a bit of a different approach. So Cesium works on top of Unity and others, so it's not specific to that. So that's kind of the different approaches, right? Do you build your data to go into multiple ones, or do you leverage what's really good about one platform and build from there? So,
well, it's the data versus platform perspective, and in this case, with Around, they're bringing the data and the platform at the same time, whereas Cesium's more focused on the data portion and letting people bring it to a platform that they're building in.
Yeah, once again, I think that we as an industry are lagging terribly behind the gaming industry. I feel that our in unwillingness, I guess is the word I'm looking for, to admit that it doesn't have to be all fun and games just because it has the word game in it, has been very frustrating for me in a lot of my work. And I think it's great that people are going, look, these are tools, and these tools work wonderfully, and we should be doing this more aggressively. So I think this is just another indication of that snowball just tumbling down the hill, which is great.
And what they're including, they're saying it can be used for a digital twin, but some of the things they're including for realism are things that we know people have been working to bring in to this environment, which they're including sunlight, weather conditions, but, even down to road signs, traffic lights. Just amazing what you're going to be able to see and do finally brought together in this.
The NSA is buying personal data again. Well, okay, a government agency is buying personal data again. I can't remember if NSA was one of the ones before or not, but basically a whistleblower out of the U.S., out of the National Intelligence Office, has suggested that, this is occurring and that it's something that, we have talked about in the past where government receiving information that is not directed by and supported by a warrant, iffy at best, especially for legal purposes. So, yeah.
This is one of those areas that I think that is very confusing even for people in the United States, much less can be very confusing for people outside of the country. But, there is a very strong, well, there should be, ideally, let's put it ideally, there's a strong fire line between what corporations can do with customers' data, interchange of things, and what government can do with the exact same data. So some of what they're doing, you may look at this on the surface and go, well, Google's collecting this and Microsoft's collecting that and Amazon knows all that stuff and things like that. And you're not wrong. And that's a separate debate to have, I think. But what they can do with that information like Jesse said, from a legal standpoint, in terms of, criminal prosecution or investigation or anything like that, is there's a very strong firewall within U.S. codes, precedences, and laws to keep that from happening. I think this is a lot more understood and celebrated and advanced, in my opinion, just editorial opinion, in Europe as a rule. But we even have that here in the United States, that sometimes the boundaries are a little fuzzier than we like. And that's why it's important to bring these news items up, so we can say, look, that fuzzy boundary may have gone well into the non-fuzzy bit, and that could be an issue.
Yeah, and I actually, as a little note to this, I was reminded about how that data is collected and stored when I was on Google Maps and planning a new trip to Japan. And I started looking at some sites, and I saw the little note in small print over on the left. You visited this, and it gave the date, right? Or 5 years ago, or whatever. And then I think I zoomed in, and you could get the actual date. But just a reminder that data is out there, and I think that keeping awareness of this, we're just so used to it, and we've talked about this for many, many times on the podcast. Is that part of it? Is that every time you notice it, you have to say that it's happening, and then you have to say, what are you going to do about it? And especially those in our government elected offices have to say that we need to do something about this. That's just my U.S. take on it. As you noted, Frank, I think other places are far ahead of us in trying to get a handle on this.
And I think this goes too, Sue, to what we've talked about in the past, but also say that this isn't something new through, the media industry and others, this collection of data through data brokers. Sometimes the data brokers themselves don't know what they're collecting. They're just selling, and it's sold, and it's up to the industry itself, the geospatial industry, to understand the best practices and protocols, and to know what the laws are and the lines are, because that's something that is important to them as professionals. Because sometimes people outside the field, that's not what they're looking at, or that's not their area of expertise, nor do they care, because they're looking at, I'm collecting, I'm selling. Sometimes they might not even know what it is that they're selling.
I'll avoid turning this into a mini topic, other than to say that, in a functioning democracy, in theory, we're allowed to evaluate this and say collectively, we have issues with it. We'd like to have that addressed. So it is important to reflect on this stuff and say, do you have issues with it? Do you think it needs to be addressed? There are channels to start that process or that dialogue. Well, and that's always been my problem with the term volunteer geographic information, is that the term itself implies that you volunteer it for one piece of use, that it's for all uses, because you volunteered, you signed it, you said, I'm going to do all that stuff. But I think it's fairly safe to say the majority of people who are volunteering their geographic information are not doing so 100% cognitive of all the ways that this can be used.
Yeah, I just make fun of it in class whenever there is this term, ignore it.
Yeah. It's
okay. So Apple may be, and others, this is just an example from Apple Maps, but mobile mapping could be having real world impacts on businesses and things like that. And so in this particular case, in Australian examples, Apple Maps was showing businesses closed when they were open, and people weren't going because they were being told the business was closed. And so
permanently closed.
And so, this is an impact on the livelihood of those businesses. They've gone through and tried to change it, and even then it doesn't necessarily correct the errors. So, we think about this data and utilize this data heavily now, whether it's Google Maps, Apple Maps, OpenStreetMap, where of course this data is a little bit easier to edit. I guess Bing Maps still. But through all of these, there are errors, and we know there are errors, and some of them are easier to correct than others, and some of them are giant mountains of paperwork and things like that just to get one little thing changed sometimes. And yeah, it has real impacts. And that doesn't even talk about the location being off. That's just the attributes themselves being incorrect.
We have a personal example of that with Barbara and I. There's a restaurant we go to occasionally, and we work in Fairmont, West Virginia, and we live in Morgantown, West Virginia, and it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And sometimes when we work late, we'll get stuff to go, and we're more familiar with the restaurants in Morgantown, so we'll order something online and then go pick it up and bring it home and have it for dinner. But there's a place that we like to go that was showing up closed one day. And I thought, okay, that's weird. And then it kept showing up closed. And that's luckily we called and said, it shows you're closed. Are you closed? And they're like, no, we're open. What are you talking about? So we've actually experienced this ourselves in real time. And you just sort of accept that the majority of the information you see on these platforms is accurate. So that means that everything's basically accurate, which is, like Jesse said, it's factually wrong. That's not true at all. But it's very difficult to distinguish what is and isn't pieces that you should pay attention to, think a little more critically. It makes it very difficult. And that can be a big challenge in the modern age, and sort of sniffing that out and saying, let me double check this stuff. That's, it's tricky.
Well, I think in part, and this even goes back to the article we were just talking about, that we're getting into, we're starting to, with some platforms that have, had issues in the recent years, we've relied on them like a public good, and we forget that that's not their end goal. That might be something they're doing for us and with our data, but ultimately they're a business.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound like I'm victim shaming in this response, but, it's tough because if it's a big business, like a international or a national company that has a major website, I can go to that website and check the information. But there's a lot of small businesses that don't necessarily maintain that information on their websites. They don't necessarily have a website. If they have a Facebook page, they may not have the times they're open on the Facebook page. So it's become hard whenever we rely so much as businesses on these other services to have our information correct for people to find it, because, it is money to set up a website and things like that. So it's just extra money that small businesses don't necessarily have, let alone the expertise to do so.
Speaking of which, if you'd like to save money setting up a website, you can visit our sponsor. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Yeah.
But they've all started thinking about that one web page that that it is.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I mean, what's the responsibility, right, at the level? So, we handle geospatial data all the time. We know there's errors in it, but at the volume of data we handle, we don't always catch them. But this is that question, like, where's the responsibility? And also at a resolution right now, not a temporal resolution, where the changes could be daily, and updating is used to being different. So who's the I don't actually, since I don't have a business, I don't know the procedure for getting listed on these sites, whether they're scraping it or, you manually go in. But if you manually go in, then you have to know how to do that. So yeah, I mean, on the one hand, if you're going to offer this stuff and say that's part of the value of your platform, inaccuracies are a problem. And on the other hand, if it's something that's on the business owner to participate in these things, then they should better understand it. As you say, like, not everybody is the same savviness. So.
Yeah. So again, it sounds like it's victim shaming, but it's not our goal by any means to say it's the business's fault or necessarily Google's or Apple's fault. It's, kind of that gray area of it's the data. Who is the real arbiter of that data?
Well, I think that you can make the argument more broadly that it is the industry's fault for not coming up with a standard mechanism, a standard technique, a technology, a protocol. I don't really know what the solution is here. So that, much like whenever we go to a website, we see that little locked, icon that says this is safe and secure, and it uses secure sockets layers and all that stuff like that. We get that, and we get to see, okay, I know what this is and I'm comfortable. This is where I'm going. There should be, I think, ideally some sort of protocol that allows a business to publish it relatively easily, and then that's what it's read from, and then you have your authoritative source. But I say that easily, knowing a little bit about what the technology would take to make that, and that's not trivial. So I get it. We don't have it because it's hard, and we haven't figured out how to do it yet. But it is something that I think that we could push back on the industry broadly, not any particular actor, to say you really should be thinking about this stuff. There are attributes that are important and also can be a bit more fluid, that the authoritative source should have the mechanism for accurately and authoritatively reporting that.
Well, having worked with small businesses and encountered this problem before, it's almost the similar to the keeping your things in a shoebox. That some of this needs to be in training through Small Business Association and other groups that work with small businesses to make them aware, because some of this is, again, the technology surpassing where training is, and even where the knowledge is of how these things work. Not understanding what their own role in this is. Maybe setting aside, 1 day a week where you check all these things, or even keeping a list of where you might be listed. So I think that it's a shared responsibility, and it's a responsibility for the modern world. This wasn't like this even 10 years ago, but it is part of your business routine today.
And our final two news items are some I call it bittersweet space news items. And so the first is that the Ingenuity helicopter, which has flown successfully 71 times on the surface of Mars since its landing. Unfortunately, on its 72nd flight, it had some problems on the landing, so a rough landing, and damage to the helicopter, so a broken rotor has meant that was it. 72 was the final flight. So much, much more than what they thought was going to happen. And I know I've seen on some news sites the last picture that Ingenuity sent from the terrain of Mars. And so this, I think it actually happened in the end of December, but they haven't been able to do anything. So yeah, I think it's just, again, amazing what was accomplished in the first time that you had a vehicle actually flying separate flights on the surface of Mars. And the second news item was actually some excitement. Japan became, I believe it's the 5th country to successfully land a lander on the moon. And while it was very precisely landed, unfortunately, its orientation when it landed was incorrect, not allowing it to deploy its panels to power up. So mostly successful, and Japan rightly excited about joining the elite crew who have put man-made items on the moon. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like the mission will be able to continue with anything else. So we'll pour one out for Ingenuity and its successful mission and say, well, enjoy your time on the moon. Oh, I think the Japanese lander is called Slim. I think that's the name of that one. So anyway, so some milestone really space news and some kind of sad space news.
And Sue, for both of those, now I have the resources to ask people that study emotion and how people feel, to ask them why it always feels so emotional when we hear news like that.
Yes, there you go. I always very sad for them when they finally end their mission, so far away and all alone, really.
And that's it for the news. On to the events corner, as always, you can find out about this event and others over in the show notes.
4S, the Small Satellite System Services Symposium, is going to be May 27th through the 31st in Palma de Mallorca, Spain.
Of course, if you'd like to add your event to the podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
I can be reached at barb@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com.
I'm available at jesse@veryspatial.com. And of course, you can find all of our contact information over at veryspatial.com/contact.
As always,
we're the folks from Very Spatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
And we may actually get back to a normal episode.